Frédéric François Chopin. Frédéric Chopin gave us some of the finest and most original piano compositions ever written. His new ideas, full of imagination and feeling, brought about an increased appreciation for piano music on the part of both the musician and the musical public. The Chopin family home was part of a large estate in Poland. Chopin's father was a tutor for the children of the count who owned the estate. It was in this house, surrounded by snow-covered fields, that Frederic was born in the late winter of 1810. Legend says that musicians from a neighboring village played under the windows that night in spite of the snow. While the story may not be true, popular music was to play an important part in Frederic's life. More than once he was to use its melodies as a source for his brilliant compositions. Frederic was christened at the village church when he was only about 2 months old. A few months later, the Chopin family moved to the city of Warsaw, Poland. Frederic's father, who had been born in France, had accepted a job teaching French in Warsaw. Even as a small child, Frederic loved music so much that he used to crawl under the piano and sit there by the hour, listening to his mother play. One night, 4-year-old Frederic was found sitting at the piano trying to play it himself. Soon his mother began giving him piano lessons. He made such rapid progress that by the time he was 6, his family decided that he should have a trained music teacher. Frederic's teacher, Adalbert Zwingli, was one of the best musicians in Warsaw. He spent long hours teaching the boy to play the piano. Frederic was always grateful to him. Through Zwingli, he grew to know and love the music of Haydn, Mozart, and Bach. When he was only 8 years old, Frederic gave his first public concert. He amazed everyone by his musical ability. Frederic was invited many times to play the piano in the palace of the Tsar's brother, Grand Duke Constantine, who greatly admired the boy's talent. Throughout his childhood, Frederic played in most of the great palaces of Warsaw. By the time he was 10, Frederic had already composed several fine musical pieces. While Frederic improvised at the piano, Zwingli wrote down the music for him. The Polonaise in G minor, which was composed when Frederic was only 7, was reviewed by the Warsaw newspaper as the work of a real musical genius. Frederic was a good student at school. He did not especially enjoy mathematics or science, but won prizes in history and literature. During summer vacations away from home, he sent the local news to his parents in the form of a small newspaper he wrote, imitating the form and style of the large Warsaw newspapers. Drawing was one of Frederic's favorite spare-time hobbies. He loved to sketch in his exercise books and was a good cartoonist and comic artist. Music, however, always came first, despite his other interests. Frederic would even get up in the middle of the night to write down a melody that occurred to him. During his school years, he continued to compose, but his music was written to please himself, not the public. Only one composition, the Rondo in C minor, was published during this time. In the summer of 1826, when Frederic was 16, he enrolled at the Warsaw Conservatory to study music under Joseph Elsner. Frederic still had much to learn, and Elsner was the most brilliant teacher in Warsaw. In his report at the end of the year, Elsner wrote this about Frederic: Chopin, Frederic, exceptional gifts, musical genius. Elsner insisted on allowing Frederic freedom to develop musically in his own way, saying, "He doesn't follow the usual path. But then, his talent is no ordinary one either." Frederic was not very strong and was often ill, so his family gave him a specially furnished room at the top of the house. There he practiced endlessly and continued composing. Soon, however, he began to dream of traveling. His first trip was a 2-week visit to Berlin when he was 18. On the way home from Berlin, Frederic discovered an old piano at a roadside inn. While waiting for the horses to be changed and the coach to set out again, Frederic sat down and played the piano to pass the time. In a short time, a crowd had gathered, and the room was full of people, all listening spellbound to Frederic playing the piano. They wouldn't let him stop, even when the coach was ready to leave. But they finally had to let him go, after the innkeeper had drunk a toast to his health. When Frederic was 19, he set out for a short trip to Vienna with some friends. His studies with Elsner were completed. He was eager now to win world recognition. "What does local applause matter?" he asked. "Let the people of Paris and Vienna judge me." In Vienna, Frederic gave 2 concerts, playing his own compositions. The critics praised him highly, although some thought his playing was too delicate. But Chopin's light touch was exactly what set him apart from other pianists of the time, and audiences, particularly the women, were delighted with this new technique. After returning home, Frederic for the first time found it difficult to compose. He spent much time dreaming about a young singer whom he secretly admired. He managed to express his feelings in the beautiful music of his piano concerto in F minor. Frederic performed his concerto for the first time at home for a small audience of friends who applauded it enthusiastically. The first public performance, a month later, was a triumph. When Chopin was 20 years old, he left again for Vienna with a friend. As a special tribute, Joseph Elsner led a student choir in a song especially dedicated to his most talented student. Chopin took with him a silver cup filled with Polish soil, a remembrance he was to treasure highly because he never returned to his native land. Shortly after the young man reached Vienna, news arrived that a revolution had broken out in Poland. Chopin's friend returned home immediately to join the revolt, but Chopin's father instructed him not to return, because Frederic was not strong enough to fight. Some months later, Chopin left Vienna and set out for Paris. He felt that his music was not appreciated in Vienna and hoped for a better reception in Paris. Along the way, Frederic learned that the Polish revolt had been crushed and that Russia had captured the city of Warsaw. Chopin expressed his sorrow over the fall of Warsaw in his stirring Etude in C minor, called the Revolutionary Etude. This composition is filled with rage and despair at the cruelties of war. Chopin reached Paris in the early autumn of 1831 and took modest lodgings in the Boulevard Poissonnière. His next step was to meet Frederic Kalkbrenner, one of the leading concert pianists of the time. After hearing Chopin play, Kalkbrenner said he had talent but needed training. It would take 3 years to turn him into a top-rate pianist. Frederic agreed at first to take lessons, but they lasted less than a month. Frederic had no wish to become a carbon copy of his teacher. The two men remained friends, however. Another of Frederic's close friends was Franz Liszt, the famous Hungarian pianist and composer. Chopin and Liszt spent many hours talking about music. Both Liszt and Kalkbrenner helped smooth the way for Chopin's first Paris concert. In February 1832, Chopin gave his first Paris concert, playing 2 of his own works. The newspapers praised his original ideas and predicted a brilliant future for him. But the concert did not bring any immediate results. Chopin was worried about his lack of money. One day, he wrote to his family that he was thinking of going to America, where life might be easier for a struggling pianist. But the same day, a chance meeting with an old friend led to an important turning point in Chopin's career. Chopin's friend took him to a party at the home of the Baron Rothschild. There, Chopin played the piano for the guests and was an immediate success. The Rothschilds and their friends were wealthy, important aristocrats. They arranged to take music lessons from Chopin for high fees and spread his reputation far and wide. Chopin's money troubles were over, and soon he could afford a fashionable apartment, servants, and fine clothes. During the next few years, Chopin did much composing, and fine works like this etude, or study, were published. The greatest pianists of the time played his compositions in concerts all over Europe. Chopin's fame as a composer continued to grow. In 1835, Frederic visited his parents at Karlsbad, Germany, where they had come to spend a holiday. He spent some of the happiest weeks of his life with them. It was the last time he was ever to see them. On his way back to Paris from Karlsbad, Frederic stopped in Dresden to visit Count Wodzinski, the father of an old school friend. The Wodzinskis welcomed him as if he were their own son. When he left the Wodzinskis, he wrote a special goodbye waltz for their daughter, Maria. In return, Maria gave him a red rose, which he, in a romantic gesture, wore next to his heart. The next summer, Frederic asked Maria to marry him. She accepted, but her mother asked them to keep the engagement a secret for a year so that Chopin would have time to recover his health. He had been ill the previous winter in Paris. After months of writing letters, Maria broke the engagement, and Frederic never saw her again. Chopin's unhappiness over the broken engagement ended a year or so later, when he came to know Aurore Amandine Dudevant. She was a writer who used the pen name of George Sand. Frederic was to remain fascinated by her for 9 years. George Sand and Chopin spent a year on the island of Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. In these beautiful surroundings, George Sand wrote a novel, while Chopin completed many fine musical compositions. Among these were the Preludes, some of his most poetic works. But the climate was bad for Frederic's weak lungs, and he became quite ill. Hoping that the climate in the French countryside would be good for Frederic, George Sand invited him to her home at Nohant, a comfortable, quiet country residence. Here Chopin rested for several months and partially recovered his health. For many years, Chopin spent his summers at Nohant, where he composed some of his finest works. Among these is the lovely sonata in B minor. It was almost 2 years after returning from Majorca before Chopin felt able to appear on the concert stage. In April 1841, he gave a concert in Paris, playing only his own works. The concert was a great triumph. For the next few years, however, he gave only occasional concerts, because they were too great a strain on his failing health. In 1848, Chopin went to London. There was a revolution in France, and the French had no time for concerts or music lessons. Chopin appeared in public in London only a few times, since he was now very ill. A year later, in Paris, he died at the age of 39. Frederic Chopin was dead, but his music lived on. His piano compositions, some of the finest in the world, are still played and loved today. His contributions to music were many. He brought new forms and ideas to the creation of music for the piano, and his originality of approach gave rise to new techniques of piano playing. For these reasons, Chopin is considered one of the greatest 19th century composers.